Let's go ahead and bring in our special guest. You've seen her here before. Her name is Kshama Sawant. She is the former Seattle City Councilor. She is also now running for Congress as an independent. Let's go ahead and bring her in. Welcome back, Kshama.
So nice to be here again. Thank you, Sabrina.
Thank you so much for coming on. It's been a crazy, crazy month for news, I would say, especially this week in particular. But you made an announcement recently that you are running for Congress as an independent, and you are running against a representative named Adam Smith. And I want to hear a little bit about him because I wasn't familiar with him until I heard that you were running. And so I looked him up a little bit and I was like, wow, he has kind of flown under the radar a little bit. I feel like he's not one of those Congress members that we see on MSNBC or CNN all the time. And I didn't realize just how corrupt this particular representative is. So tell us why you decided to run against him.
Yes, first of all, as you said, I think in one of your previous shows where you mentioned our campaign for Congress, that when you looked at his record, it was like a moment of, how is this guy even getting reelected over and over again? And I think that is the correct sentiment, the correct response to have. And I'll talk about Adam Smith. I will say, though, that response that you had, that's the response we should have for most of these people in Congress, right? I mean, if you look at their record, if you look at what they are doing and the way they are selling out working people, especially oppressed communities, and then on top of that, both parties being warmongers, you really wonder how, to what extent is the U.S. Congress representing working people? And it's not, which is revealed in the rock bottom approval ratings of the U.S. Congress and of the Democratic Party also, in addition to Trump and the Republican Party. So who is Adam Smith? Adam Smith is an almost 3-decade long Congress member, with a 3-decade long tenure in the U.S. Congress. He is not a foot soldier in the warmongering parties. Adam Smith is a general among war hawks. He not only has cheerleaded the funding for the genocide in Gaza that's going on right now, on the whole, he has been bankrolled by the weapons industry profiteers, and you name it, and that company is donating to him. Lockheed Martin, General Dynamics, Palantir. The CEO of Palantir, Alexander Karp, has already maxed out donations to Adam Smith's campaign for next year. Keep in mind, this race is going to be next year, not this year. And so Adam Smith has the blood on his hands of the over 500,000 Palestinians who have been slaughtered in this genocide, according to the estimates from the British medical journal, The Lancet. But it's not only that, he also back then in 2002 voted for the U.S. invasion of Iraq. And so he also has the blood of 1 million Iraqis on his hand. And in reality, he has not met a war he didn't like. He has strongly supported, cheerleaded wars on Syria, Iraq, as I said, Libya, Kosovo, Afghanistan. The list goes on and on. And in addition to that, he's also been a darling of Wall Street. He's one of the most thoroughly pro-corporate politicians. He has shown long-standing and unwavering loyalty to the billionaires. He was part of the aggressively neoliberal pro-corporate offensive of the Democratic Party in the 1990s. Some of your viewers are probably too young to remember all this, but in reality, the whole Bill Clinton era in 1990s, as some of us know, really transformed the Democratic Party, really, going on this offensive against working people, although keeping in mind the Democratic Party was never a party of the working class. It was never a party that represented oppressed people, but it became much more aggressively so. And Adam Smith was part of that. And he also, in fact, just one other thing to note about Adam Smith is also he's been for nearly 3 decades now, he's been part of the push by the Democratic establishment to actually take the party even more rightward, even more pro-corporate, even more hostile to working class interests. So during the George W. Bush presidency, just to give you one example, his advice to the Democrats at that time was to reduce the contrast of the Democrats from Bush and the Republicans. And he also said that the Democratic Party should consider privatizing Medicare. And so it's no surprise that notorious health insurance corporations like United Healthcare and Cigna, which ferociously oppose Medicare for all, and any form of healthcare. And as you know, our campaign is calling for free healthcare for all by taxing the rich. It's no surprise that these corporations who are hostile to anything like that have donated to Smith's campaigns as well. He also supported the shameful bailout of big banks in 2008 under Bush, and then he supported continuing those bailouts under Obama. So this guy has a long track record of loyally representing big business, of being a warmongering general, and received campaign donations not only from corporations you'll think of as, oh, maybe they do support Democratic Party. He's also received campaign donations from Elon Musk's SpaceX PAC, not once, not twice, but in every election cycle since 2010. So he is the epitome, Adam Smith is the epitome of everything, all the reasons, sort of encapsulates all the reasons why the working class has lost out between the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, and we need an alternative. And as you know, Workers Strike Back and I are calling for a new party. And as part of that effort to build a new party, we are running as independent socialists against Adam Smith, against the war. We're running as an anti-genocide, anti-war, pro-worker campaign. We're calling for an end to the genocide and to the occupation and to the US military funding for Israel. Also, we're calling for free healthcare for all, funded by taxing the rich, and for national rent control.
Wow. Yeah. So there's a lot to unpack there about Adam Smith. Like he's very corrupt, basically a Democrat by name only, because he's.
I would say, yeah, I mean, yes, I take your point, and you're right in the sense that actually, to your point, actually, one of the viewers of the most prominent Trump supporting podcaster here, Brandy Cruz, she had Adam Smith on in November or December last year, to do the whole post-mortem of why did Kamala Harris lose. And one of the viewers of that show, who's themselves Republican and right-wing, they said, wow, he sounds more Republican than Republicans. And so you're right in that sense. He does actually represent quite a conservative and pro-corporate, pro-billionaire agenda. I'll only say, though, that in reality, what he represents is what the Democratic Party stands for. In reality, it's just that people like him don't get challenges, and this is going to be the real challenge to his sort of three decade sort of domination there.
And that's what I was going to ask, if anybody had challenged him before, because from what I understand, Seattle tends to be a little bit more progressive. So that's why I was kind of surprised that people are voting for him. But if he hasn't had a challenge, that explains a lot. So
I mean, a lot of people don't know about him, because that is what they rely on. The Democrats and also the Republicans, it's a bipartisan agenda against the working class. They rely on most people not knowing about what they actually stand for. So that's why one of the crucial things that our campaign is doing is actually educating people about what this guy is actually about.
Okay, so you said Workers Strike Back is forming, I guess the goal is to form as a third party. Will this be a collaboration? Will it be Socialist Alternative and Workers Strike Back together forming as a third party?
No, we're not forming a third party per se, because it's not about, you can't just form a third party on paper and expect that it will actually be what we think it needs to be, which is a party that is rooted in big movements and is challenging in presenting an actual challenge to Democrats and Republicans. What I am saying is that Workers Strike Back is calling for a new party, but as part of that effort towards building a new party that is actually credible, a party that can present a credible threat to the Democrats and Republicans, we need independent campaigns like ours, which show the clear contrast between what the Democrats and Republicans stand for and what we actually need as working people.
Okay. There was a candidate that ran as an independent in Nebraska, Osborne. I'm not sure if everybody's familiar, but he came very close to winning. And I was surprised. Like, and he supported increasing the minimum wage. Like, he supported some of the things that Kshama supports, that I support, and he came very, very close. And he was aligned with the workers. So it's just, Osborne is something to look at. I do think we need more independence in Congress. I think we need third party representatives in Congress. It can't just be this, one or two independents but they caucus with the Democrats. Does that make any sense? You know what I'm talking about? Like, we have an independent, but they always caucus with the Democrats, or they always caucus with the Republicans, instead of holding the line when they can, especially when it comes to legislation.
Oh, I completely agree with you. And in fact, it's not even hypothetical, right? We have shown in Seattle that it is possible to run as an independent. It is possible to bring up bold demands, and it is possible to win those elections and win those demands. I mean, when we ran first for our first time in 2013 for Seattle City Council, so many political pundits told me and told us, our whole campaign, that we should not bring up $15 an hour, which was our main demand at that time, now 12 years ago, and taxing the rich, and for rent control. They thought our campaign was too radical. They said I shouldn't say that I'm socialist. They said I should run as a Democrat. We threw out that rule book, and we decided to really demonstrate that actually working people are very open to, and in fact are hungry for, independent alternatives. But not just independent, as you correctly said, Sabrina. It's not about independent in name. It's about showing that you can build movements and win victories. That is what we showed. We won 4 elections in Seattle. All of them were as an independent socialist. Nobody was under any notion that I was a Democrat. In fact, we made it very clear that we were not part of the Democratic Party. We had to battle the Democratic Party that rules this city in order to win our elections, because they ran candidates against me. And we had to battle the Democrats alongside the big business entities to win $15 an hour, to win the Amazon tax, which raises hundreds of millions of dollars every year for affordable housing, and to win the unprecedented renters' rights that we won. So we have already shown that it can be done, but we also need to show that nationally, which is why we founded Workers Strike Back, and this congressional campaign is part of that effort.
All right, let's look at some of your demands. I want to go ahead and bring this up on the screen here. So one of the first demands you have is, in the genocide in Gaza, no military aid, no occupation. Now, this is important because you're running for a congressional position. So when you look at the way that some of those politicians have voted on legislation to give more money to Israel, you would vote differently, is what you're saying here.
Absolutely, but it's not only about voting. It's for sure, starting point is, yes, you're right. It's about voting differently. First of all, I was just going to say that's a low bar. If you're going to actually, if you claim that you represent the working class, let alone you claim that you are a socialist, then voting the correct way is a low bar. That's the bare minimum you need to deliver. Otherwise, you've completely betrayed working people. And unfortunately, AOC is in that category. She voted present on Iron Dome, Iron Dome is part of the slaughtering machine of the Israeli state. And to refuse to vote no on it, voting present is like abstaining on the vote. It's like not having the courage to vote no on it, but also maybe not being as brazen as voting yes. But it was a complete betrayal of the anti-war movement to vote present on that. AOC also voted to break the railroad workers' strike. That is an absolute no in my book. If you claim to be anything like a working class representative, let alone a socialist, and you break a strike, that's it. That's a line you cannot allow your representatives to cross, just as a genocide is a line you cannot allow your representatives to cross. So yes, voting the correct way is the bare minimum. But what we have shown in Seattle is exactly what the Seattle Times, which hates everything I stand for, said, but they accurately said that we came out of nowhere. We, meaning myself, my fellow socialists, we came out of nowhere to commandeer the city's political agenda. So we not only voted the right way, but we actually did far more than that. We set the city's political agenda. We forced the Democratic Party to to actually end up supporting our demands, which they were sworn not to. Like when I first went into office, when I first took office, within a few weeks of me entering my office, actually, two of the top Democrats came into my office, sat me down, and said, "Well, it's all well and good. You've rabble roused your way to City Hall, but we're here to tell you that City Hall runs on our terms. You're not going to win any minimum wage increase, let alone 15." And less than 6 months after that day, we had won $15 an hour. And all those council members, including those two, were forced to vote yes. We won inflation increases. That is why Seattle's minimum wage today is the highest in the nation at $20.76. And that's the basis on which we won our other victories as well, which is our setting offensive demands and going on the offensive to win it. How? By using our office, by using my office to build mass movements. Unfortunately, this is almost entirely missing from any progressive elected officials. And then in addition to that, we built strong movements by also exposing the nature of the Democratic Party. It's not just about voting the right way. It's also about saying these Democrats, they're rotten. They're selling you out. We need to build our own movements.
So I guess one of the questions I have about this one in particular, in the genocide in Gaza, no military aid, no occupation. What about BDS? What about boycott, divestment, and sanctions?
We absolutely support the boycott of the weapons industry. So, for example, the workers in France and the dock workers in France and Italy and Greece have refused to load the ships of ammunition and weapons bound to Israel. That is the type of boycott absolutely that we need. And we've launched this campaign about 6 weeks ago. So this campaign platform is going to sort of expand into explain all the positions we have. So this is absolutely something that I've spoken out many times. We also support the sanctions on all the leaders of Israel, Netanyahu and his cabinet ministers. There are sanctions against them. We absolutely support that. I think as far as the boycott sanctions and also we support divesting of all the universities and all the public institutions of anything to do with the genocide and with the Israeli occupation. Absolutely support all of that. The reason it doesn't say literally that we support BDS is because we don't support the part that will get in the way of international working class solidarity, which also it behooves us. We have a responsibility to also fight to win over the working class in Israel, and obviously that's a very difficult project right now. But there is a left in Israel. It's a very small one. It's a struggling one, and there's a small number of working people who are opposed to the genocide. And so we want to make it clear that our agenda is completely international and it's completely working class.
So I think I in particular think that Israel should be boycotted in many other ways. I don't think we should, if we can help it, buy products that are made in Israel. I think that Israel should be held fully accountable, even if that means that they have economic collapse.
I think that we want the economic collapse of the state itself, but it won't actually help us if our position sort of reflects the idea that we don't care about ordinary people. Even when ordinary people espouse really horrendous views, it is our job actually to fight to win them over. And so, it's the same reason that we don't support sanctions against Russia. We're absolutely opposed to the war, the Russia-Ukraine war, but we don't support sanctions against Russia because if you look at the evidence, the sanctions actually hit working people the hardest. And we have to make it clear our position on the boycott, divestment, sanction is a little bit nuanced because we want to make it clear that our enemies are the ruling class in Israel. Our enemy in the US is the US ruling class, not working people in the US. Similarly, in any other country, our enemies are the ruling classes of those countries, not the working class. And if you look at the evidence on sanctions, it absolutely, the statistical evidence is that it really hits working people the hardest. And so that's not the clearest point of view. But I also want to be clear. There are a lot of people on the left who support BDS. It's not our preoccupation to speak out against that. But we make it very clear that this is our position. And as I said, the there are big parts of the BDS idea, the BDS policy or the BDS program that we strongly agree with.
Yeah, I think where I have disagreement here is I don't think we should try to work with people in Israel at all. I think that Israel, I don't believe that Israel has a right to exist. I don't think that I have strong, obviously, against the Israeli government, but I do not think that we should be working with people in Israel at all. A lot of them are settlers there. They have other options. They have other opportunities. And I just think it behooves us to try to work with that state in particular, because the reality is the numbers show the majority of Israelis in Israel support exactly what is happening to the Palestinian people. So I don't think that we should work with them at all. And I
We're
support.
not, no, but Sabrina, we're not working with people who are settlers there, or the Israeli settlements. Absolutely, we are completely against settlements. In fact, we want to end the brutal occupation, and because we are talking about working class internationalism, that does not, let me repeat, does not translate into us thinking that the Israeli state should exist. Absolutely not. If you look at the whole project of Israel, the Israeli state, the whole formation of Israel was not about ordinary people. It was about Western imperialism, the interests of British and American capitalists, specifically for their fossil fuel profits and also geopolitical interests. Israel has always been, from its inception, an outpost of Western imperialism. So we absolutely don't agree with the existence of Israel as that kind of state. What I am saying, though, is that we are not going to be able to really achieve what we want to achieve without basing ourselves clearly on working class internationalism. So, in other words, we insist on making a distinction between the Israeli state and ordinary people in Israel. But again, when I say ordinary people in Israel, that does not mean that we support the settlements. Absolutely not. Those are not whom I'm referring to as ordinary people. I'm referring to people, working people on the left, as I said, albeit a small number there, who are against the genocide, who are calling for protests against Netanyahu. I'm also talking about Arab Israelis who are actually on the receiving end of the brutality of Israel, except that they are not in Gaza or the West Bank. So if you just say a blanket Israel and don't make a distinction between the Israeli state, the interests of the Israeli state, the Israeli ruling class, and global capitalism, especially Western capitalism on the one end, and working and oppressed people on the other, it becomes difficult to distinguish between those two things. So we have to be very clear that we are against the Israeli state, and also clear that the very inception of the Israeli state was a project of capitalism and imperialism, and the settlements in the Palestinian lands are absolutely brutal and horrendous. And we don't support, even if they may be ordinary people, we don't support their settlement agenda. We are not on their side, but we are on the side of ordinary people who are facing the brunt of the Israeli state.
But I don't see how they're oppressed when we give them money. We support Israel every year financially. They're not oppressed though. Like that.
But the
That's.
state is not. But Sabrina, the state is not oppressed, obviously. But you have to make a class distinction. There has to be a class distinction. So Palestinian, Arabs in Israel are very much a marginalized community. So they are an oppressed community. I am not going to go and say that I am against them. I want to make a distinction between them, and also there are people on the left. I know for a fact that there are socialists in Israel who are opposed to genocide and who are absolutely, in fact, showing more courage than we are, because it's very hard for them. They are under a lot of repression. So we have to make a distinction between those people and the people who are representing the interests of the Israeli state. We cannot conflate the two. It's no different than people saying, I hate all Americans because I hate US imperialism. But would that make sense? Would it be correct for people in India, for example, who hate US imperialism, to hate all black working people, white working people in the US? No, it wouldn't make sense, because working people are not deciding the agenda of US imperialism any more than some ordinary socialists and others and Arab Israelis are deciding the policies of Israel. They're not.
Yeah, I think we'll have to agree to disagree on that one. But I do want to get to the next one, which is free healthcare for all, tax the rich. And I think you mentioned in your announcement video that one of the ways you wanted to do this maybe via ballot measure. If we can talk a little bit about this as well.
Yes, we need free healthcare for all, funded by taxing the rich nationally. But we also have seen the whole dismal history of healthcare, where we see Democrats and also some of the labor leaders associated with the Democratic Party, closely tied to the Democratic Party, bringing Medicare for all bills. Every so often, there's also a bill right now with no intention of fighting for those bills, let alone winning them. That strategy is a dead end strategy, trying to go through the Democratic Party. We need independent movements, just like you had AOC promising there would be $15 an hour, federal minimum wage, and Bernie Sanders also ran a campaign which was very popular. All his demands were very popular. What did the Democratic Party do? It completely crushed both his campaigns, and then now, unfortunately, AOC and Bernie Sanders have both completely capitulated to the Democratic Party and succeeded in winning absolutely nothing. So that's the kind of dead end we are talking about that needs to be avoided. We cannot just keep going down that route and expect that someday, somehow, working people in the US are going to win healthcare. And that is why it's not, and I want to be clear because this is often a point of confusion. The distinction is not a superficial one above local versus national. No, if we had a movement that was strong enough to win what I'm calling for, free healthcare for all, funded by taxing the rich nationally, that is absolutely what we should be doing. But we don't, and that's why we have to start somewhere, but we have to start on the correct track, meaning not put our faith in the Democratic Party basket again, but instead build independent movements wherever we can to win them. And that's why, as a matter of strategy, we are saying that we will build a movement, and we've already started building for it, for a mass, and we are going to need a very strong movement to win anything like this. Free healthcare for all in Seattle through ballot initiative funded by taxing the rich. And in fact, as I said before, we've already won the Amazon tax in Seattle. So we have a tax on big corporations, which obviously the wealthiest people pay. We're proposing that be increased to $5 billion in order to fund free healthcare for everyone. And the idea is exactly what happened with $15 an hour. We won 15 in Seattle. We made Seattle the first major city to win it. And then the fight for 15 spread nationally. So despite the obstruction of the Democratic Party, despite the big business fighting against it, because we won here, working people in other cities and states also won. The fight for 15 spread across the nation. That is what we know will happen. We are fully confident that if we can win in Seattle or anywhere, really, the problem is there's no other leadership anywhere. Nobody's brought forward this type of agenda that we're bringing forward. So that's why we're doing it in Seattle. And if we can win it in Seattle, I'm very confident that that movement will spread nationally, which is also why the healthcare corporations, the hospital industry, the big pharma corporations, all the billionaires and all the investors on Wall Street who own shares, the majority shares in all these corporations, they are going to fight viciously against this. That is why we will need a fighting movement. But the reason they're going to fight so viciously is not only are there profits at stake in Seattle if we win it, but they also know that the real prize that we can win is that movement going national and winning. And one other thing I'll say is about this strategy is that that is how Canada won its public health care, by winning it in one province. And then that program became so popular that the conservative government, actually, that was in the federal government in power at that time, they felt the pressure to actually pass. And that's how it passed nationally.
Yeah, I think a lot of people may not be aware of that Canada did do it that way. That's why a lot of us have been just crossing our fingers for, imagine if just one state in the US could make this happen, and then it kind of becomes a domino effect. So I definitely, of course, 100% agree with you on universal healthcare. We need rent control, make the corporate landlords pay. I want to hear about this one. We do cover a project that is released once a year. In fact, they should be putting out that report again in a couple of weeks, called the Out of Reach Report, where they actually tell you how much you need to make in each state to afford a 2-bedroom apartment. But I want to hear a little bit about this rent control.
Yes, I mean, if you look at the situation, I mean, you sort of outlined it already, that, if you look at within metro areas like New York, Seattle, Boston, all of these areas, Los Angeles, Houston, Chicago, you name the city, and this is true about that city, which is that it is experienced skyrocketing rents, and so many working class people are being pushed out, and they are facing longer and longer commutes to their workplaces. And also for the younger generation, it is so much harder. The younger generation is actually, as we know, the first generation in the US now that is worse off than their parents. And so for the children of most working class and middle class parents, they are even in an even worse situation. Many of them are couch surfing. Many of them live in group houses for long periods in their life, even into their 30s and 40s. And so the crisis is insane. I mean, if you look at some of the statistics, the median rent is higher than, tens of thousands of dollars higher than the median wage in those cities. So how are you possibly supposed to pay your rent and then also take care of your other needs when your rent is so high that it actually exceeds the amount of wages you make, and in some cases, if it's not as bad as that, it leaves you with so little that you can afford little else. So in that sense, it is a massive crisis. And if you look at, and this is the most important thing, if you look at the connection between rents and the profits of the landlord corporations, that is the key here. That the skyrocketing rent is not something in the air or an act of God. It is a very specific agenda by the landlord corporations. And I say landlord corporations and not landlords, because if you look at how rental properties, residential rental properties are now organized in the last 20 years, the vast majority of them have been consolidated into the hands of a few private equity corporations, and then they of course hire management companies. For example, so if you're a renter, if you're watching this and if you're a renter and you don't know who actually you're writing your rent check to, that's a very common situation. You're writing to some middle management company, and then they give it to someone else, and then there's someone else. And so ultimately the big guns who are making profits, they are the billionaires of Wall Street, the people who own maximum shares of corporations like Vanguard and BlackRock. If you Google all of this, you see sort of, you can trace the money all the way to the billionaires. And so the skyrocketing rents is a specific project of the billionaire class, of the American capitalists, to denude the working class even more of its meager earnings, to make even more profits, even more wealth at the top. So if you look at some of the statistics, like the 6 largest corporate landlord companies, they brought in, like last year. So if you look at their profits for last year, in the first quarter, so just in the first 3 months, they made $300 million more than the same time in the last quarter. So in 1/4 of the year, they made hundreds of millions of dollars. And so if you sort of extrapolate that for the profits they're making, increased profits, that is an increase, $300 million increase in profits. So if you look at the increased profits, you'll see the same trajectory. If your rents are going up in the last 20 years insanely, then profits for the billionaires are also going up insanely. So the program for housing affordability absolutely has to include massive expansion of publicly owned high quality social housing, which we of course talk about in our program, because ultimately we want housing into public ownership and we need housing for all. But an essential step there is to actually establish rent control, because it is insane how much profits these billionaires are making at the expense of ordinary people.
Yeah, it's I don't know. I've talked about this on the show so many times. The housing cost is just absolutely ridiculous. I want to get into, of course, I agree, $25 minimum wage. It's Jesus Christ, long overdue at this point in time. And just for the record, for those who are not aware, there are several states now that already have passed that $15 minimum wage. For those who are not aware, we passed that in Massachusetts years ago. So I agree with the $25 minimum wage. And then one I did want to highlight is the unions, good union jobs for all. I want to talk a little bit about that because I know like that's a big part of Workers Strike Back is creating unions and protecting people that want to be a part of a union.
Yes, absolutely. In fact, if you look at the statistics on the union movement, and if you look at union membership as a metric, it actually explains. It is a factor that it's the main factor that explains improvements in standards of living for any group of people. If you look at women, or if you look at Black working class people, or people of color, or as a whole, or immigrant workers, any section of the working class, including the working class as a whole, you see throughout history the formation of unions and building stronger unions and having greater and greater union penetration among the working class. It is the single most important factor that explains it. Why? For very simple reason, that when workers are in just atomized as individuals, we have no power against the bosses, against the billionaires, against the capitalists. But when we can get organized, we potentially have a lot of power. And I say potentially because unfortunately, if you look at the trajectory of the union movement in the last 30 years, and even in the last 50 years, but especially in the last 30 years, it has been pervaded by what I would call business unionist ideas, meaning the leadership of the union movement, of the labor movement, has become, there's two trends you can see, and they both go together. One is very close ties to the Democratic Party, really sort of giving cover to the Democratic Party that is selling us out year after year. And that goes hand in hand with the idea that the role of the labor leaders is, and that was a Freudian slip because they act like business leaders. The role of the labor leaders is really to manage workers, their members and their bosses, and to somehow mediate between the two. That is a completely false concept, because the interests of the working class and the greed of the bosses, these are two completely irreconcilable entities. You cannot it is not, it's not something that you can find medial ground on. It's because capitalism is a zero sum game. When the bosses make more, it comes out of our wages and benefits and things that we can get for our lives. And so to win anything substantial, we're going to have to fight back. And so one of the things Workers Strike Back stands for, and of course our campaign for Congress also stands for, is a militant action inside the labor movement. So that's why in our program we talk about how we need independent candidates and independent campaigns and independent elected offices that will not only bring forward bold demands like I talked about before, like we did in Seattle, but also to use our office, to be prepared to use elected office to go on strike with the workers, to enable workers to go on strike and to support them. And of course, we have such an abysmal situation right now, where not only do we not have elected leaders who do that, we instead have self-proclaimed socialists and squad members and DSA members like AOC actually breaking the railroad worker strike and stabbing them in the back. And that is why that is why we're calling for militant actions, including strike actions. In fact, we need strike actions even against to end the war. We need to shut down the ports, to shut down big businesses, shut down the profit-making machine, the warmongering machine. And we also need to build a movement to repeal right to work and other anti-union laws nationwide, especially in the states in the South. And we need to build movements to win stronger victories.
So I support unions. I interviewed a couple of employees that were a part of the Railroad Workers Union on the show when they were trying to go on strike at that time. And one of the things that they said to me is that union management did not listen to the rank and file. And this is something that we've seen happen a couple times throughout unions. What about worker cooperatives? Because I always see unions as the starting point, but I see worker cooperatives as the end game. So that way employees own a piece of the company.
Worker cooperatives show a very important example of how these workplaces like grocery stores or other factories, they can be run really, really efficiently, produce high quality product, and be owned by all the workers and the community. So so the idea of a cooperative producing socially beneficial products, and also being owned by the community, by the workers, meaning giving higher living standards to all the workers who work there. So there's no one person or group of people pocketing most of the gains of the business. That is very important. I would say that we cannot, I wouldn't call worker cooperatives the end point. I would call it a demonstration of what needs to happen, which is capitalism being overthrown, and we need economic democracy overall, because you cannot have some worker cooperatives under capitalism, because first of all, that does not address the vast majority of injustice that workers face. So if you're not in a specific worker cooperative, then the vast majority of workers don't get the benefits of those worker cooperatives. However, the most important aspect here, why I don't believe that worker cooperatives are the end point, but a demonstration of what needs to be done, is that when you have any successful examples of something like a worker cooperative, and even it doesn't even have to be that strong, the capitalist class will absolutely crush it. So you've seen so many grocery stores. I'm using that as an example because that's a thing here in the Northwest, where you have these enterprises that started with that kind of model. They weren't exactly worker cooperatives, but that was the idea, that it belongs to the community. It's a non-profit. There's no specific group of people who pockets all the profits. It all started really well. But then what happened? All these businesses got taken over by the big corporations, the same corporations that own Safeway and so on. So like, for example, the current CEOs of some of these formerly sort of cooperative type of grocery stores were used to be CEOs or CFOs at Safeway and Albertsons and elsewhere. So they bring in that whole corporate model. Because why? Because for the capitalist class, having any example, even isolated example of an alternative to capitalism, that's dangerous, because that example then becomes contagious, because people will want that, because it will be popular. Capitalism, working people hate capitalism because it doesn't work for them. What's missing is the leadership to actually provide an avenue out of it. And that is why I would say the end point is socialism, not worker cooperatives. But worker cooperatives offer a vision of what's possible.
One more I want to get to as well. First of all, I appreciate you having something on your platform for Black Americans in the war on Black people, stop mass incarceration, fund housing, healthcare, education, and union jobs instead. What I'm curious about is there support there for reparations for those who are American descendants of slavery?
Absolutely. If by reparations, we're talking about the best. We need the best strategy to address the horrific wrongs to people who were enslaved. Black slavery and also the Jim Crow segregation. I mean, these were absolutely horrific, and we need disproportionate programs that will actually raise the living standards and improve the lives of Black working class and poor people. That is absolutely an urgent issue for us. We are, as socialists, we are fighting against all oppression. And in fact, we've already demonstrated that it can be done. For example, when we won the Amazon tax in 2020, it was actually through the George Floyd rebellion and the Black Lives Matter movement. And as part of the Amazon tax push, we not only won the hundreds of millions of dollars raised every year for affordable housing for people in general, working class in general, we also won a specific chunk of that money of millions of dollars every year, specifically for Black working class and poor people in the historically Black neighborhood, which is actually right around where I live, where so many Black people have been pushed out because of the skyrocketing rent. So, this is funding for publicly owned social housing, and it's all automatically affordable for people. And so those homes are already being built. And so absolutely, that is crucial. If you look at the statistics on what are the programs that are the most beneficial, that disproportionately advantage Black people to right the wrongs right the historic wrongs, you see that they're mostly these massive universal programs. So for example, when we won the $15 an hour minimum wage, back in 2014, it lifted 100,000 workers out of poverty, but it did that in such a way that it disproportionately positively, that is disproportionately affected Black workers, because Black workers are overrepresented among the poorest workers. So all of these programs actually that we are calling for, they are part of what we think is needed for dramatically improving the living standards of Black working people.
So I just want to say I think we're talking about two different things. Reparations aren't programs. Reparations is a debt that is owed. When slaves were freed under General Sherman's promise, we were promised 40 acres and a mule, and that didn't happen for the majority of us. It started to happen, and then of course, if I understand correctly, Andrew Jackson came in and stopped that. So I think we're talking about two different things. There's programs, and then there's reparations, which is a debt that is owed. So when people are asking, do you support reparations? Like Marianne Williamson had this as a part of her platform, and she looked at the dollars. I think her math was wrong a little bit on this, but she understood that it meant that we're talking about cash payments. That is a debt that is owed, similar to what happened to Japanese Americans that were part of the internment camps. They were given cash payment reparations, and so were their descendants. So when I ask, do you support reparations, I'm talking about the debt that was owed.
Yes, I understand that. If there was a movement today that actually that had momentum to win cash payments for descendants of slaves, we would not oppose that, but it would need to come from the wealthy. We don't agree with dividing white working class people from Black working class people, because that ends up benefiting the ruling class. The only people who benefit from that kind of division are the bosses. And so we would support cash payments for Black working class people, but on the basis of taxing the rich or taxing big business. And there's no question that Black working class people deserve reparations. Absolutely. I mean, I don't disagree with the concept of that at all. I don't, the history is undeniable, and we want to. And as a socialist, especially, I feel that very strongly. I'm talking about how we can actually win that. And as far as the cash payments go, and here's the deal. You know us, Sabrina, and hopefully many of your viewers know. You may agree or disagree with us, but we don't bullshit anyone. We will tell you what we actually think can be won. And that's why I'm saying very clearly that if today there was a movement to push for cash payments and cash reparations for Black people on the basis that it's not regressive, meaning it's not coming from other working class people, we would strongly support it. But if you look at the data actually on cash reparation, there's not much, because there hasn't been much of that. But if you look at the cash reparations that were done, I think in Illinois, there were a couple hundred Black people who got a one-time payment of $25,000. And I have several things to say about it. First of all, yes, as I said, if such a program can be won, and if there was a push for that, we would not stand against it, except, as I said, we don't believe in dividing working class people.
So, Kshama, I have to interrupt here. We have to put aside the whole dividing thing, because it wasn't divisive when it was given to Japanese Americans, and that was signed by Ronald Reagan. It wasn't divisive then. It seems like it's only divisive when it's something that applies specifically to Black Americans in this country. And so I have to push back on that.
No, look, first of all, I wasn't there, so I don't know. I don't know the details, unfortunately,
right,
of how that was funded.
No.
But like I said,
I understand. That's why I'm trying to tell you, like, because I think your platform is pretty good, but I feel like this is something that I really want you to get this right, because this is something that cannot be avoided. It does need to be addressed. And what I'm trying to tell you is there's a difference between programs and cash reparations. And because it has been done for other groups, it was not considered to be divisive then. So when it comes to American freedmen in this country, and all of a sudden the term divisive comes up, that is very insulting towards us. So the reality is there is a debt that is owed. And the study that you talked about with Illinois, that wasn't even really reparations. What they were trying to do in Illinois was more like a housing thing. That wasn't the debt that was owed either. So this is what I'm saying. And I say this because they've been trying to push this in Congress. They've been reintroducing this bill. And if you win and you get in Congress, would you vote for something like that? But it's not divisive to give people what they're owed.
As I said, there is no question that Black working class and poor people deserve reparations. There's no doubt in my mind about that. I don't think it's correct to bring up what Ronald Reagan did, because first of all, I mean, I'm not going to pretend I know details, because I don't. I'll go and look at it, but I wasn't even there. So it's like
I
posing
wasn't
something.
there. I
Yeah.
wasn't
So
there either, Kshama.
let me explain. But I'm saying that our position here is very consistent. We don't want to divide the working class. So if at that time that had been divisive, we would have said these reparations absolutely are deserved by the people who were victims of the Japanese internment, which was another horrific racist program. But that money should come from big business or the wealthy. So what I'm saying is that had we been there then our position would have been consistent, which is we absolutely think that Black people and other oppressed people who have faced specific horrors deserve reparations. There's no disagreement on that concept. The question is how to achieve it. And the reason I brought up the $25,000 thing is that is the only example. And you're talking about cash repayment. So I'm talking about that example. The reason is this: it's a mathematical thing and it's a political question. It is yes, that's not enough. Obviously it's not enough. In fact, the average debt of the Black community, it's actually the median level of debt is $28,000, meaning half of the Black population has at least a debt of $28,000, and the rest have less than that, but at least half of the Black population has at least 28, or if not more. And so this one-time payment won't cover it. But the reason I'm using that as a benchmark is that's the only actual example we have, and it does help. Here's the deal: it is not enough, but even to win that much, just $25,000 per Black household, if you count, average, just an estimate of 15 million Black households, that comes to $375 billion. So the question for me is, how do you actually win that? I'm not opposed to that. How do you win that? I don't think it is easy to win something like that without the bringing working class people together in a multiracial unity. That is, in my view, that kind of program, that kind of demand would, if that had any life to it, it would actually end up dividing working class people and would not win, because it's $375 billion. That money has to come from somewhere. I mean, are you actually suggesting that somehow we could win that without real movements, and it's possible to win real movements without actually uniting working class people? But if of course, if that program came to Congress, of course I would vote for it. But I'm saying that we need to clarify where that money comes from.
I think that there should be a movement. I'm not disagreeing with you about a movement, but I do want to be very clear about the data. I highly recommend reading Dr. Stanley Darity's book, From Here to Equality, where he breaks down the data about what's owed. And I don't know if you know this, but as it stands right now, it's predicted that by 2053, that Black people's net worth in this country will be zero. We have been at the bottom and we stayed at the bottom. And this is something I even pushed back during the Bernie campaigns on. I have to address this. The universal policies, they do help. Yes, they lift all boats, but we are still at the bottom. And that's the problem. So you're lifting everybody, but we're still not where we should be.
That's not, I don't agree with that, Sabrina. If you look at the programs that we are talking about, that does disproportionately lift Black people. You have to be based in actual data.
We don't, Kshama, we don't own. We don't own
but neither
anything.
does the working class. Neither does the working class as a whole.
No. But Kshama,
yes, you have to look at actual data. And if you look at actual data, for example, yes, I'm not denying the statistics you said. I am very well aware of the statistics you just shared. My question is not, are the statistics accurate? Of course they're accurate. My question is not, do Black people deserve reparations? Absolutely not. They absolutely deserve. My question is, how do you win that kind of shift? And so for me, I would prefer to define it as dramatically lifting up the living standards of Black working class and poor people, which is effectively what reparations would do. And in my view, just mathematically speaking, talking about cash payments simply will not solve the problems that Black people face. So, for example, we were talking about rent control. I mean, if you look at Matthew Desmond's book, Evicted, he specifically goes into the racial bias of the rental industry. And he talks about how among renters, over 1 in 5 Black women report having been evicted sometime in their
Yeah.
adult life. And he goes on to say, if incarceration had come to define the lives of men from impoverished Black neighborhoods, eviction was shaping the lives of women. Poor Black men were locked up, poor Black women were locked out. This is just an example of what we will need. If you look at Medicaid, for example, all the underfunding of Medicaid and the work requirements, I mean, all these horrific things that have actually kept Medicaid benefits from reaching Black families. This is all before Trump, the horrendous, beautiful bill Trump cuts to Medicaid. I'm talking about before that. What was happening? Black working class and poor people in the southern states were the most horrifically denied health benefits, health care. Why? Because Medicaid, which is a universal program, actually, because it's administered by federal and state governments in the South, it was administered so horrifically that it has been that so many Black people actually have far worse outcomes there than they do in other states. So if you look at the expanse of suffering and misery for the Black community, you can see that the biggest improvements, like the most dramatic improvements, happen when you have these massive demands, like minimum wage
Right.
increase in the $25-$30
Right.
an hour, like
I'm
affordable
not
housing,
saying,
yeah,
yeah,
like healthcare.
I'm not saying those don't make improvements. I'm not saying that. I'm saying it does. Those do add improvements, but the reality is we are heading towards a net worth of $0. And every time we tried to build something, it was either burned to the ground or it was taken from us via eminent domain. When people go to New York City and they go to Central Park, they need to know that that was a Black neighborhood that was called Seneca Village and it was taken away. This has been our history over and over again. When we talk about labor, part of that labor is unpaid labor, and that was slavery. So all of these things are connected. And that's just my piece on that. And it's not to not to put pressure on you or anything. It's
No,
just
no,
that
I mean,
that is something that I've asked every candidate that has come on this show. And Jill Stein came on here and she had that as a part of her platform. So did Dr. Cornel West. So did Claudia De La Cruz. Most of the people that have come on, they've had reparations on their platform. So I don't want you to feel as though I'm trying to get on you or anything, but I've asked everybody about that.
No, 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 absolutely not. I mean, I really appreciate this conversation. And also, we would not have been as successful as we have been as independent socialists and winning victories if we were not open to conversation. I mean, we're not inventors of demands. What we do is, what we're good at is having a finger on the pulse of working class people and seeing which demands people are going to be willing to come out and fight for. And so in that spirit, it's not like this campaign platform is etched in stone. If we are convinced about something, we will add it. So it's not that. It's more a question of, do we think that this makes sense in this way? Not the concept of reparations, but in the form of cash reparations. So first of all, just to be clear, if that kind of policy did have momentum, my point is that I don't think it can have momentum in the way that it needs to have, because precisely because most of these politicians don't, I'm not talking about Dr. Jill Stein, I'm talking about the Democrats, they have no intention of actually fighting for anything, let alone winning anything. They just pull out the word reparations from their back pocket anytime they want to talk to Black voters, make sure they're corralled into the Democratic Party, that type of thing. We don't do that type of thing. We put forward demands that we genuinely are absolutely going to give it our best shot. We are very serious about what we put in our program. That is why this discussion, that's why we look at everything in detail. But just to be clear, if there was momentum for a cash reparations program for Black community, absolutely we would support it. There's no doubt about it. It's more a question of, can that be done? And then second thing is, if there were people who wanted to fight for similar demands, not just cash reparations, but programs to make sure that Black home ownership could be expanded. Absolutely, we would support that. And in fact, that is, home ownership is the most most crucial way through which working class people build equity, and home ownership rates of white working class people and middle class people are far higher than in the Black community. That is absolutely true. And so if there was a push, if somebody wanted to said, let's build a movement to expand Black home ownership, absolutely we would support it. So I'm giving you these examples to say that we're not opposed to the concept. It's a question of how it's actually done.
Okay. All right. Kshama, where can people go to follow your campaign?
People can go to my full name, kshamasawant.org, KSHAMASAWANT.org. Sign up to donate and also to volunteer with our campaign. Especially if you're in the Seattle area, then you have to become active with our campaign. We have monthly mega canvases, and we have many, many tabling and phone banking shifts. We're actually getting huge response for our demands. In just the under 6 weeks that our campaign has been live, we have raised over $150,000 from nearly 1,400 donors, and these are donors from all 50 states plus Washington, D.C., and Puerto Rico. We've had many, many volunteer shifts already, so please join us. If you're not in the Seattle area and you are excited about this campaign, we still need your help because this is a national campaign. In fact, Worker Strike Back members and other supporters in many cities across the nation are already campaigning for us. So please, fill out the volunteer form on our website, and we'll be in touch with you.
All right, Kshama, thank you so much for your time. Hey guys, this was a Sabby clip. If you like what you saw, hit that like button and subscribe.